Hello, good afternoon, good day if you're too far from Africa. I'm Lara Souza, I'm Mozambican, I'm a filmmaker, director, producer, and I have a great honor to be here today with Corian. Corian is an Angola uh, producer.
Well,
Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. The the Portuguese is always but yeah, for me it's a great pleasure to be with Corian today. Corian is a big inspiration for us as young Lusophone artists. He has a great story to share with you all, and I hope we have a great conversation today. I'll start by telling a bit more about Corian so we can all know and get ready to be inspired. Corian Du was named as one of Forbes' 15 young African creatives rebranding Africa due to his over a decade and a half of contributions to the creative industry in his native Angola and beyond. His remaining of contemporary African storytelling and has earned local and international recognition, including multiple Emmy Award nomination, a Soul International Drama Award, African Movie Academy Award, and FESPACO recognition for groundbreaking projects such as Windek, Jikulu Meso, sorry Korean if I mess it, Njinka Queen of Angola, Bangalugia, Science of Style, and I Love Kuduro, in addition to projects for clients and partners, including DSTV, Globo TV, Grupo Prisa, Record TV, RTP, and among others. Corion has also been discovering and empowering a new generation of African talent through talent scouting, mentoring, and training initiatives with alums including top models Lesnia Minher, Maria Borges, Almina Estevão, Alessia Moraes, Reta Letoko, as well as some of Angola's leading notable creative and technical talent in television, dance, dramaturgy, and entertainment. Coriondu holds a BA in mass communication from Loyola University in New Orleans in the US and an MA in dance theater, body and performance with Trinity Laban Conservatory of Music and Dance in the UK. First, no, after this, let me just say that we have a translation in French and in Portuguese for the ones who need it, and maybe me if I continue to mess a bit with the English. But welcome, Korean,
thank you.
please.
And thank you for that wonderful introduction.
And maybe you could start for telling a bit about you, like how your story life brought it until here, how everything in your life like conduct you to this moment of your life and this place in the Lusophone African
Of course.
markets.
So I was born in Angola in the mid 80s. As I think many know, there was a very big, not only civil war in Angola, but also a regional war in Southern Africa around the time that I was born until I think my early childhood. So in 1993, my mother decided to move us outside the country, like many families did. And I ended up spending a very brief time in Portugal, but I grew up mainly in the United States. So I was there, from the age 10, turning 11 to university. So most of my education was in the US, but in a household that was Angolan and Ivorian because my mother is from Angola. I was born in Angola until that time, the exception of the small time I spent in Angola. But my stepfather was from the Ivory Coast, so my extended family was, Ivory Coast and West African as well on that side. So I think that gave me a lot of perspective, not only of what it is to be Angolan, but also the African experience in the diaspora, because I was growing up in the United States, experiencing probably more African culture than I had experienced in Angola, where I think it was a bit more insular and we are more exposed to our own various cultures inside the country. So that was, I think, very something that I think happened automatically, but it was very formative. The fact that when I got to the US, I was heavily bullied for being a foreigner who was Black and was African and who did not conform to the stereotypes of what Africans are, because Portuguese African speakers are a minority, and were not very visible. So my reaction to that actually was to become more proud of my culture, to showcase it, to learn more about it. So whenever I had the chance to go back to Angola, because after a few years it was actually safe to go to certain parts, especially to Luanda, for Christmas or for other holidays, I would really spend a lot of time trying to learn and reconnect to my own culture, because I kind of felt not very connected to the US at the time, but then also, trying to be connected to my own culture. And I think that's really what led me to the creative path. I had also, luckily, some younger aunts and uncles who did nightlife events and who ran bars and restaurants, and I had, some summer jobs working there. And I think that sort of fueled my passion, especially to get into event, because I started doing like small events that were focused on younger people, because at the time, in Africa we have a reverence for elders. Everything is geared towards adults. So my uncle who had a club said, okay, you can do a matinee for your friends and invite people. And I started doing that, a few things, and and that led to, since Angola was not Angola, but Luanda was much smaller and the population wasn't as high as it is now. So people kind of connected, and people from brands found out that I was doing these things, and I started doing a few things with theater, and fashion as well. And that's sort of what led me to, I think, really being ingrained in my passion, um, and to really focus on learning more about this even before I got to university, because I started exploring a lot, particularly in the design space for dramaturgy, because I was working with theater, local theater in Angola when I was on vacation, and doing fashion design, which led me to the opportunity to actually intern, which is funny. The first time I worked in a telenovela, I was a costume design intern in 2001, and then a costume design assistant in 2004 or 5 for another telenovela, which was interesting because that was like way beyond before I thought I would actually produce or write one. And obviously this was meanwhile I was studying in the US, full time still in university. And after university, because Hurricane Katrina actually happened the last year of my of my studies. So I was done. I was like, no, I'm going back to my country. I can't deal with this anymore. And luckily, by that time, the Civil War was over. I tried to go corporate just to, again, please the aunties and uncles. So I worked. I was like, okay, yes, I have a advertising degree. I'll try working like a marketing department of a bank or something. So they're happy. And it was not for me, because I had been doing so many other creative things as a freelancer. Um, Before that, I was like, this is not it. And then I had clients who kept asking me to do like activations for them. So I decided to open Simba Comunicação. When at that time I was doing mainly brand consulting, activations, etc. Then I got the opportunity to get invited to rebrand a TV channel, because when I was a child in Angola, there was one TV channel. When I got back there was only one TV station, but they had a lot of competition from pay TV operators, particularly from Brazilian TV channels, and channels that were more entertainment driven, like MTV, etc. And they were not really delivering, because a lot of the education that I think a lot of TV technicians had in Angola was still that kind of colonial, very news, like broadcast news focused education, and not a lot of entertainment. So essentially, I was one of the companies that was invited, not only because a lot of the things that I had been doing up to that had been connecting well to the millennial audience, which was the majority of the population at the time. Now it's probably all, Gen Z. But yes, but at the time that was it, and I was doing things that was connecting to that audience, even in the branding space. And I was asked to do the same for what was supposed to be the second channel, that was like the entertainment channel. So there was extensive work, not only to do visual and content rebranding, but actually training, because that's the thing for me that was always very important, is
Yeah.
actually filling that gap. Because as someone who is African, who grew up in the West, I've noticed that the biggest gap that we have is we have the talent, we had the potential, but then there's not a lot of access to training and the information that sometimes people need to gain those tools, which is why I always made a point to, whenever possible, participate in projects like that. I have been doing that, had been doing that prior, because my first big production project, actually, while I still was in university, when I was on vacation in Angola, was doing production for a show which was like, because we have a very big connection with with the Brazilian celebrities. In Angola, and at the time, it was always very popular to get Brazilian celebrities to either come perform or do cameos. And I remember I had done a fashion show. I participated in Fashion Week, and a Brazilian actor, Sergio Menezes, who was working at Global, liked my collection, said, "Oh, I'm doing a play, and I would like you to do the costume design." And I said, "Yes, I'll do the costume design if you and the cast come to Angola and actually train local theater actors and young people who are interested in acting." So I was like, that was a trade-off for me to do it. And then him and his sponsor accepted, and that was like my first gig, like big production gig there, which was nice. 2003, I was still in college, and I was working with like a major. Because to us, Brazil's like Hollywood and global, especially. So, like, yes, I'm working with like a major celebrity. I'm dressing him in the cast, and it was very exciting. And then there's the nice part that local theater professionals will get this exchange. So it's
Yeah.
nice that I was able to translate this also into the audiovisual and TV space, which is why when I started producing things, I really wanted local people to feel seen and local professionals to be authentic and to be empowered to actually show their voice. Because a big problem is, because yes, we are Portuguese speaking, we are Lusophone, we seem very exotic, but we're still an African country where elders have the last word, hierarchy matters, etc. So it was very strange for a lot of people because, I was training people who are my seniors, which also for me was strange because I had a piece of knowledge that they particularly needed to unlock, and I had things that I also needed to learn from them. So it was quite an interesting exchange. Things as simple as trying to coach, for example, on air talent to actually not speak in a 1980s European Portuguese accent, when they naturally speak with a cadence that is, influenced by a regional language of the east of Angola, for example, was a big deal because that was what was Britain, creating the gap, is that people were kind of trying to operate in a model that was not realistic or adequate to the time they were. It was not natural. It felt forced. So it was nice to be part of that. And because that went well, we then had the opportunity to actually design and launch the first international Angolan channel, which was CPA International for that particular client. And that was, it was what led to luckily getting, projects for RTP, because we had the opportunity to, as a result of that visibility, be invited by the Portuguese broadcaster RTP to co-produce Voo Direto, which was the first show in Portugal with a multiracial main cast, which is a big deal for a country like Portugal, and for RTP to actually lead this thing. And then obviously that is what motivated me to do things like Windeck, which was a challenge because access to funding of projects is quite difficult. So I had to use my advertising brain, because first it was me as a advertising person who was used to doing copywriting in the branding and advertising space, trying to write a script. Luckily, since it's several episodes, I got a writing room together, but it was also trying to get the project done. So there's a lot of brand collaborations. People always ask me, why was it about fashion? Why did they have like all these luxury cars and you're in a developing African country? I was like, well, because I needed to pay for the project, and these luxury companies, because Angola was going through such a, I guess, economic growth and there was so much hype about it. I was like, okay, I'll take this opportunity to actually do something that will also benefit the creative community, and to try to get the project done. And the rest is, I was really, really pleased that I did a project in Windeck that really resonated, firstly with Africans, because I was really overwhelmed by the support that I felt uh, from many people from various different African countries, especially in Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and I would say just the West African region, both English and French speaking, and then the diasporas, and the French audience. So I was very, very surprised because obviously, again, I think although I'm very confident, and in my skills, and I always want to learn and to do more and outdo what I do, there's also that little thing in my mind where I'm like, oh, you're from a Lusophone country, people will not really want to see what you want to do, etc. So that was a really good reinforcer, not only for myself, but for a lot of creatives in our market, that it is possible, that our neighbors are interested in our work, that people out there in the world are interested in our work. And that's That's also how then Jinga and Gigolo Meso came about, because there was more corporate sponsorship opportunities as they arise. Obviously, I do a lot of contemporary documentaries, and people always ask me why I like to do contemporary storytelling based documentaries. And I'm like, well, it's because our history and our culture is something that is alive. So our ancestry affects the here and now. So I like to respect the past, but also really look at what's happening now and what the future could be. So
Yeah.
that particular thing is really important, and that's also what I try to do and impact to the people that I coach or that I train, because talent training has been a very big part of the work that I do and that I insist on doing. I've trained probably over 1,000 technicians, and I'm really proud to see success stories of that nature. Whenever I see, for example, someone who used to work for me, who went from an intern to a high-ranking position in one of my teams, who now owns their own production company, is sharing that knowledge and is making amazing work, who's also getting recognition, or you mentioned, for example, Maria Borges, who was one of my mentees when I scouted her as a model when I was doing the elite model contests in the PALOP countries, and briefly in South Africa, actually. And it's amazing that now she actually owns her own agency and is now launching the careers of future models, 10 years down the line. So that to me makes me very motivated to keep going and to keep in that path, because a lot of the times people think that, especially when you do commercial work, because most of our work is commercial television, they kind of disregard the importance that has and the impact that has. But I really try to use that to empower, especially young people from our region who sometimes lack the confidence because they think that we are overlooked because of the language we speak, or because we are from an African country, or all those factors. And I think that confidence gap is really important to break.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more of how, like, what are the what what for you were the biggest challenges on like rebranding Angola in the way that it's was connected to the cultural heritage, to
Mhm.
connected to the country and not to the like a Western pattern, and
Yeah.
how you think this was like the groundbreaking part of your work. Like, could you tell us a bit more?
Yeah.
Because I think that is one challenge that it's uh, like we all have it, but
Exactly.
Lusophone Africa
We
is
do. Yeah.
we do have
Well, I think there's still a lot of work to do, I think, for all of us, including in Angola. And what I like to say is, I think what a lot of people don't realize is I actually respect a lot of history. Like the reason why I was able to make a telenovela in Angola is because there were people doing it before I did. Like I watched Angolan telenovelas and I remembered some of them fondly from my childhood before production was interrupted due to the civil war. So there are people who had that talent, and that did that, like planted that seed. There was already award-winning, critically acclaimed Angolan filmmakers before I came along, and I studied their work. Because we had Antonio Ol or Zezé Gamboa already as great filmmakers. So I think that is what motivated me, because I was like, okay, if they are Angolan, there's not a lot of us, but if they were able to do it, if Antonio Ol is getting amazing recognition for his film and his visual artwork internationally in major platforms, if Zezé Gamboa is getting a Sundance Jury Award, like I can also do it. Other Angolans can also do it. So I think that's the main challenge is actually getting people out of the mindset that things are not possible because we are limited by language or by region or by ethnical background. Yes, those are limiting, but they don't make things impossible. We have to work. We have to work being realistic about the landscape, because I think that's also the problem. Sometimes we don't really recognize the landscape because we're very insular, and I think for many years before social media technology, a lot of African countries was insular, which is why for me, for example, as someone who grew up in the diaspora, I always found it very perplexing that outside of our own continent, Africans are more together and interact more with differing African cultures than we did in the continent. Because obviously I was from a household that was, you know, I would say being broad. One was Lusophone, the other one was from a Francophone West African country. But then all the friends and people that we were with in DC, they were from Ethiopia, they were from obviously the Palop countries, they were from Nigeria, from um, everywhere, from Morocco, etc. And it's interesting that we had that connection, that common connection that we are all African and we are interacting, which is, I think, I guess where the Afropolitan term came about. But then I felt it very strange that whenever I came to Angola, or when I had the opportunity to start working, doing model scouting in, in the rest of the Palop countries or in South Africa, I was like, why are we so separated in our own home? But then, like when we are outside, we're all together. So luckily, I think technology is really bridging that gap. And we can see it particularly with music, probably, and with visual art, and sometimes with fashion, where there's a bit more cross pollination. In the film and TV space, in the audiovisual space, I believe we could do better. We could all do better, working together. And I think that's across Africa, not just across the Palop. So in terms of what you're saying about Angola's cultural image, again, that is, I'm very happy that a lot of my work, it was seen as a catalyst, and that it's inspired work in even in places beyond the Lusophone space, which makes me very excited when I see colleagues from non-Portuguese speaking countries saying, oh, I saw this and this was really inspiring, or this gave me like an idea to do something that I really wanted to do, but I was afraid to be that bold. That really also was a big motivator for me. But I also recognize that I did a lot of work. I have an amazing team, but then there's also other like-minded people who are also paving the way. And I think that is what really helped, is that though we are not many, there is a group of bold, creative professionals, I think, in every Lusophone country that really wants to break the mold and go beyond the stereotypes, and be connected. Because I think we really always have to be available and open to people and companies who want to connect with us. We should not only expect to go to our default. So I think that's maybe the answer is, I never want to default to my comfort zone. And that's sort of what really drives me, is I will always want to push myself, push my team beyond what the comfort zone is, because that is the only place where we will make interesting work, where we will surprise ourselves, and where we'll be able to, I think, further connect to people outside those boundaries, I guess, that the world created for us.
And breaking those boundaries, like what do you think is like the nowadays our, like, not our challenges, but like who are our allies, how, what, like,
Yeah.
what do you think are like the our new space are open to what, like,
So
what do you think about it?
I think that was like the big informative thing that I learned when I dared to step outside the boundaries. Like, for example, my first short film was something that I made in, I think, 2008 or so. And it was quite interesting. I think when I was this, it may not have meant anything, but for me, I saw it kind of as a sign that the first ever project that I did, that I submitted to a festival, it had gotten low Lusophone support, but it was mainly programmed in festivals in Latin America. So that was my first kind of like, okay, so there is a place out there. And then the same thing happened when I started doing sort of smaller projects, especially documentary, that I kept seeing that a lot of the interest, especially when we came to the commercial part, was always more from elsewhere. It wasn't the places I was expecting. It wasn't from Portugal. It wasn't from Brazil. It wasn't even from the Palop sometimes. And then there's also the problem that, unfortunately, sometimes we take each other for granted. Like, for example, when I try to reach across the aisle to other Africans from other places who are not Portuguese speaking, they will say, "Oh yeah, we love your work, but you're from a Portuguese speaking country, and we're from like a French or English or Arabic speaking country, so we can't really know how to make it happen with you." Yet, I started getting this feedback. Obviously, it started with, I guess, what opened my eyes was when started going to festivals and markets. But then when things like Windeck happened, where I noticed that I was getting much more support and much more value was being given by my work by maybe broadcasters and programmers in France, or in Nigeria, or in Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire, or in the Seychelles, or in Canada, then I was like, oh, okay, there is a space outside of what we expected, because before Windec was actually programmed in Brazil or in Portugal, it was already in other places that were non-Lusophone. And the only reason why value was given to it was because of that, and because I got an Emmy nomination. And interestingly enough, because again, maybe because I myself am multicultural, because I have, on my mother's side, I have Portuguese blood. I was raised by someone who was Ivorian, and their extended family as well, so that influenced me, in, especially I would say maybe more aesthetically than anything. I always like to also have that approach to my team and be inclusive. So my team is also quite diverse. And I remember, and this is something that for me was, I would say, a point of contention, that when, for example, Windec was programmed for the first time in Brazil, they kept referring to it as a Luso Angolan, as in from Portugal and Angola production, when it was not. But simply because I had people who were from Portugal, and I also had a DP from Venezuela, but they didn't say it was Venezuelan Angolan, because they had to put the European part before the African in order for it to be valid. Whereas I'm like, so this is something that, the show's creator is Angolan. The production company is Angolan. The production is Angolan. Where we shoot it doesn't really matter. Who my team is, or their nationality, doesn't really matter. So the fact that they had to put that qualifier, that in order for it to have quality, it needed to be Angolan and something that's Western, to me, it showed me where the problem is sometimes we do really need to not only recognize our own value, but our peers' value. And this is something that I see not only across the Lusophone space, but sometimes even among Africans. We don't, we take each other for granted because we always expect the support to be there. But then when it's not there, it's a shock. So I think it's really important to, I think, relearn, and re-educate ourselves into how, like, why we are not connecting sometimes. And sometimes it is that, it's that we're not, and it's unconscious. It's not something that I think people do it consciously. It's one of those unconscious things that we need to really relearn and work on together to bridge those gaps.
And what do you think, like, if there is someone in the audience that really wants to jump in our eternal fight to build our Lusophone ecosystem, like, what do you think, in your opinion, we need right now to just like ground our ecosystem, like push it to another step, another level?
I will be very honest. I think because we are minority countries, most of us are geographically fairly small, or populationally fairly small. Because, for example, Angola is very large, but it only has 30 million people, same as Mozambique. But there could be way, way more. But that's also because of our history, unfortunately, of conflict, and other issues. And obviously with Angola, the slave trade, because most that went to Latin America, and the Americas were from our end. So there is that. But I will say this, because we have those challenges that, we are in different parts of the continent, fairly small populations, that challenge of again, being a minority and overlooked, that also has built a lot of resilience and a very high level of creativity. So I really think that the biggest thing that we need right now is actually opportunities, particularly funding opportunities that are structured, that make sense. And internally, I think and I think that's just a challenge with most African spaces. We have to improve, obviously, and creators need to talk about our own standards, practices, and policies a little bit more. But that's, I think, a continent-wide conversation, and we all need help from our neighbors that maybe are a little bit further along and can impart some helpful information and hints, so that we can do that together. But I really believe that the biggest gap is indeed access to opportunities, because from a lot of the stuff that not only that I have done, but people that I have done who have had amazing international impact, you can see that it only happened because of opportunity. The only reason why, for example, you were mentioning in the intro some of the modeling talent that I launched who are doing, big campaigns for, for major companies, for Louis Vuitton, Chanel, and etc. It's because they were given the opportunities, because a casting director saw them and saw the value and the potential in those talents. And I think that the same applies to film, which is why it's quite interesting that I see in other creative industries, like for example, in music, that opportunity is being given. In fashion, that opportunity is being given. In the audiovisual space, sometimes it is, but it's still very restrictive because I think a lot of people conflate market with the creators, because just because we don't speak the language of the market you want to reach does not mean that people in that market are not interested. My biggest audience in Africa, funny enough, are not necessarily the Palop. Like, I probably have more people following my work in West Africa at present, like all over West Africa and parts of East Africa, than I do in the Palop countries, just because of the sheer number of population there. I probably have more people in France, actually, where they program many times, not only my fictional but my documentary work, than I do there. But then the issue comes that whenever I reach out to, the people that be, I don't like the powers, but the people that are making decisions, they say, yes, your work is great, it went really well when we programmed, we got great ratings, but you're from a Portuguese speaking country and we are not speaking your language and we don't quite understand how we're going to position you, because they don't quite know how to do it. So I think that is the biggest thing, is we do need that access to opportunities. uh, our body of work and our talent and our potential needs to be looked at a bit further, more than just saying or thinking that our work will be confined to our market, because that's not how the world is working right now. Thanks to not only to technology, but the fact that we are all way more connected, there's more cross-cultural interest. Like, it's like, because right now I think Africans want to get to know each other, because for many years, in several generations, we did not have the opportunity to get to know each other, which is how I ended up maybe in some of the spaces that I did, and you ended up in some of the spaces that you did, that are not in our linguistic realm. And people from other cultures really want to discover this. I had this particular experience when I did projects like I Love Kuduro, where most of my audience, when I did the events, the festivals, like I was doing a Kuduro festival, which is an Angolan music genre, in Berlin, Stockholm, New York, and Ibiza, and it was full of people of many different nationalities who actually liked Angolan electronic music. It was not mainly Lusophone or only Lusophone. So the interest is there. It's just that I think sometimes people get a little bit in that spirit of wanting to put everyone in a box that makes sense, as opposed to looking at the value. So I think it's really important to maybe do that evaluation, and then obviously look at the real business opportunities that come from our creativity and the experience, and the fact that we have to be multicultural, because someone who is in Angola needs to know what for example, our neighboring, because Angola's neighbors are the Congo, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. None of them speak Portuguese. So we do have to know what all of our neighbors want and what they think, and a little bit about their culture, because we are smaller and have that limitation. All the other Lusophone countries are the same. So we are quite multifaceted in that aspect, and very open. So I think that is a very big advantage. We just now need the actual opportunities to connect to the market and to be included in the market, in a way where we can add our added value, which may not be populational size or anything else, but we do have a creative, or various creative voices that could be of added value, and technical voices that could be of added value to regional or international projects, where they are looking for that, as they say, that certain je ne sais quoi that maybe their project is missing.
And in this like space, could you tell us a bit more like your experience on creating capacity and building careers? Because I think there is a huge potential in what you did, like on training people while they are creating careers, even if it's technical,
Yeah.
even if it's artistic, like how we can merge these two things. So our careers grow as we grow, you know.
So I think it's really important to put egos aside, especially I think when you're working in any African space. It's difficult because we're creative people sometimes, but that's I think the first exercise, and I think part of the reason why I really started working on that was because, again, because of the wonderful reverence for elders that we have, there was also a certain resistance. I would speak only for Angola right now, for people to pass on knowledge, which is a problem because then you don't build a legacy. And that information sometimes dies. That happens not only with technical know-how, but it happens with languages. It happens with pieces of heritage. So that was a major challenge when I started out. Was I wanted, like, I was really seeking knowledge, but a lot of people who had it, which were elders normally, had that resistance of impassing it because they would think that I would somehow replace them. I'm like, but I don't want to replace you. I want to learn from you so I can continue doing what you're doing. And then someone else, when I'm not here, will continue that as well. So that I think is really important to acknowledge that maybe we have to put our ego aside because we do need to build teams, know how to operate at teams, and also be open to people who have a different viewpoint, or a different skill set. Because one thing that a lot of people don't realize, and that I also noticed, which was problematic, particularly with some of my counterparts that did grow up in the diaspora and came in, is that a lot of times people really confuse academic knowledge with actual talent, skill, and capacity. There are many people who had only practical experience, practical knowledge, who are self-taught, etc., who I had the amazing pleasure from learning from a lot when I started working in Angola and working with. Which is why, when I started working, I really started from the ground up training a lot of people, because sometimes there are people who are very highly talented, but they did need some input and some guidance, and occasionally technical training. Because my first, I think, few years, I actually did invest a lot in doing like professional professional training while we were working. Like, it was kind of like my team. Part of what we're doing a lot of the time is almost like going to class inside the company, but then also applying it practically, which is interesting because then other businesses actually started hiring my company to do that for them. Even a lot of my corporate clients, uh, we did a lot of training of their marketing team or even their executive teams, um, not necessarily in the team building capacity, but actually in, again, challenging the way business is done. Because I really thought that, something that I like to say is, if you're, especially in a place like Angola or those other countries, if your country has strong brands, doesn't matter whether they're corporate, cultural, intangible, national patrimony. If your country has strong brands, then your country's brand will be strong. If your country does not have strong brands in any of those spaces, whatever they may be, then you won't really have a place at the table ever. So that's kind of why I really thought that not educating myself and sharing knowledge and making sure that people built, had more of a capacity to do what they want to do in the way they want to do it is super important. Even when I started doing things such as reality shows, a lot of people thought, oh, it's a trashy reality show where people are doing something, whatever, and they disregarded it. But I did a lot of educational reality shows, and I was actually surprised myself that they were very effective. Like, for example, when I started doing the rebranding of that TV channel that I mentioned, one of the first things that I did was actually a casting reality show to actually find young people who wanted to be on TV, as on air, but also off air talent. And it showed the process of, okay, what do they do? Like, how do you learn to read a teleprompter? Things of that nature, because it's really important for people to also get the appreciation of the hard work that everyone in the team, and that it is a team, because sometimes you'll see what's on screen, but you don't see all of the work that goes on behind that. The same thing happened when I did, for example, for dance, where I'm very proud to say that I did a dance reality show where the prize was not money, was not people becoming famous. Is they got scholarships and apprenticeships with dance companies internationally that were supporting the show, or some of them actually did get like academic scholarships to further their studies in dance. and they're applying it well because all of them now own dance studios. They choreograph most major events in the country. They're choreographing things in Brazil. Some of them are in major international dance companies, and they're sharing and multiplying that effect of something that they learned in a project that I did or within the company structure that I built, and they're now bringing it forward, and that's really benefiting the industry. I think it's very important for us to, because I think unfortunately sometimes uh, we like to throw a pity party for ourselves as African because we always like to think about certain limitations, particularly the socioeconomic ones, but we don't really think about the power that we have as a continent with so many young people who learn things so quickly, who adapt to technology so quickly, who are hungry for information. I was that young, that young kid one day, and I really think that that continues, and that drive is our competitive advantage, not only for PALOP countries, but for every African country. The fact that we do have that driving us and pushing us, and the fact that I have people who are younger in my household or even in my team also pushing me to learn new things because they're always so up to date and hungry for that information. So I really believe that is going to be an ongoing thing, and that we need to think about social responsibility, but social responsibility that generates value for the market in also in the business space, because a lot of the time people think of social responsibility as only doing charity. But there's a saying in Angola that is, it's better to teach someone to fish than to give them the fish, because then they're sustainable. So if we want to build sustainability, we really need to think about how to be socially responsible in ways that generate business, and that people can generate their own income. So I did a reality. People thought, oh, it's a nice dance reality show where they're dancing around, but now most of them own their own dance studio or their own production company. Or they're doing or they're like, interestingly enough, one of them is now doing a lot of content as well, for international clients. So it's interesting that something that people thought, oh, it's going to be boring. Like, they're going to win a scholarship. They're not going to win like millions of dollars, but that's how it happened. When I did, for example, all the modeling stuff, again, what they won was a career. They were not going to win. Oh, like, because a lot of people are used to, especially in our countries, and this, whenever there's a TV special, it's like, great, that big check with a big number comes on, and they get like a car, etc. And I'm like, great. So if I give someone money in a car, what will happen when the money runs out and the car runs out of gas? That was always my premise, which is why whenever I did things like that, I wanted to be productive. I'm like, great, if my client wants me to produce a music reality show, or a brand that I work with wants me to do that, then there should be a payoff long term for the participants. They need to be able to utilize those skills and that visibility in their favor to generate growth for themselves and for their community. And I'm very happy that that's going, and I really hope that that social responsibility, or social entrepreneurship, whatever you want to call it, drive is really, really more so present in a lot of our markets, because I believe that's what we need across the board, to, I think, benefit our various African industries.
Yeah. Like, we are almost in the end of our session. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And like, I would like you to talk a bit like about what do you think is disrupting in our cinemas, like in our Lusophone countries. Like, give us your opinion about what we've been doing
Mhm.
in our countries that are groundbreaking, that are like
There's a lot of
reaching. Yeah, tell
I
us a
think
bit about that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of amazing stuff, particularly because I think, and this is something that is I think a shared experience, particularly amongst Portuguese-speaking countries, is we have a very particular sense of humor that I think that unites us. And I think that is like, even if it's something, even if it's a work that is not humorous, but I think that particular nuance is kind of always there. That point of view is there, and you see it. Like, if you see film or TV content from across our countries, like, people always say there's something like there's something there. Whenever I see a film from a Palop country, there's always something that like I don't quite get, but that really attracts me. But I think it's that is we have that like our the way we think about the world is kind of informed by that very particular sense of humor that we've had to, I think, maybe develop. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, like I'm not sure if it's cultural or if it's a coping mechanism, but it's been working for us, and I think that really draws attention to the work that happens. I'm also really happy that there's more of a variety because I think the kind of storytelling that a lot of Lusophone creators were focusing on, maybe because they're trying to please the market, was very expected. Like maybe if we think about years past, and I think we've all like made that we've all been there where we're like, yeah, okay, we need to make something that that people will like. So I think there's more confidence, and I think because there is that confidence, the work is more diverse, there's more depth, it's more interesting, there's more variety, and I think that is what is drawing attention and why we're here, maybe because like people do see that we are multifaceted, diverse, and have different stories, different ways of saying stories, different potential ideas that we can develop, because I think people are seeing the proof. Because before it was kind of like, if you saw it, the aesthetic maybe was similar, it was something that was very inspired by whatever was a trend. And I think the fact that we stopped caring about trends, probably because like since we are doing our own thing in our own markets, I think that's at the end of the day kind of what what is helping us as well.
And what do you think? What are your plans to the future, like in terms of?
Keep creating. Keep creating, and hopefully also get the opportunities to keep working. To again, I would love to, which is an opportunity I've not had yet. I would love to do more projects that are cross African collaborations, or collaborations with anyone from anywhere in the world that is interested in the insights that myself and other creatives like ourselves can bring to the table. That is something that I believe is the most important. Is like I always really enjoy challenging myself, and and those around me in a productive way, so that we can make amazing work together. So I like my big plan is always to keep creating, have the opportunities to tell more stories, or to help someone tell their story, in the way that is best for what they aim.
And what do you think, like, because we are part of this imaginary region that
Yeah,
we are not neighbors, which is
exactly.
really
Yeah,
difficult.
because some of us are on the Atlantic, like in the South Atlantic, not the
Exactly.
Atlantic, in the Indian Ocean,
Yeah, and
all
we
over
are brothers.
all over the map.
Like, but how do you think we can start to collaborate not only inside of Lusophone Africa, but
Yeah,
like how, like what do you think we need in terms of mechanisms, in terms of politics, policies more
policy.
than politics,
Yeah,
to do this, like region,
of
like
course.
how we can be inserted in a region that it's not our
Exactly.
colonial heritage region.
Exactly. I
Because
think
I really believe that we'll benefit from these, like, natural links. We have borders with other countries. Like, how do
exactly.
you think we could portray ourselves in a more regional way,
Yeah.
inserted in that region?
So so you mentioned something really important. We really need to be more open and connected to our neighbors, as well as each other. I think the connection with each other, technology, I think is a big solution, because again, we are in different parts of the African continent. So technology is the only solution, especially now that we are experiencing a pandemic that really taught us that is one of the best ways to connect cross regionally. Um, and excuse me. And the other one is indeed the creative community looking at how policy can improve, and starting with our own policy, the way we operate, the way we work. Are we using the best standards and practices? Look at our neighbors and see, okay, are we working in a way that is friendly, that if someone from a neighboring country wants to come over here, they'll feel welcome and accommodated, and the standards and practices are going to be fairly, what's expected. Because the big issue that happens, and I've had this feedback, is that sometimes someone from a different market may come, and then they're very confused by the way another market works, because they things are there are standards in our industry, I think, internationally speaking. So we have to be aware of them and obviously adapt them to our reality, but be accommodating. So I think that's really important. And I think that's a piece of policy that's more amongst the creatives that need to work together. And then obviously push for policy, like other kinds of policy that are necessary, that make our markets more competitive. Because I think that's also something really important. We have to be like, we have to know how to work together, but we also have to make sure that our market stays competitive. And that's something that takes collective work.
Yeah, and in this line, someone from the audience asks, how can Lusophone countries find ways to collaborate without formal structures like film commissions and governmental support? Like, how
Well,
you get
it's already
creative?
happening. Like, for example, so it's already happening because I produced in Mozambique, and there was no like, and it was not through a film commission or anything. It was simply because I was asked by someone in France to produce to produce their show, because like was when I was doing Elite Model Look, was actually like that brought me the opportunity to do that, because there was a format um, of the contest for television. And because I had to scout models there, then I also had to figure out how to produce there, and had to ask my Mozambican friends, like, hey, like, so I'm going to Mozambique. I'm supposed to be looking for models, but I also have to actually produce this telecast for this to happen. How can we make? How can I? Do you know anyone, etc. Networking is the key. I believe sometimes we underestimate the power of networking. Sometimes looking people up on LinkedIn, or because again, when I was working back in 2010, when I had to figure this out, there was no LinkedIn. The internet and social media was not as advanced as it is now, and I use primarily word of mouth, and and a good recommendation from people that I know and trust professionally, and that's how it happened. Same thing in Cabo Verde. I also produced it in Cabo Verde. And interestingly enough, when I produced it in South Africa, it was the same deal. So I really think that again, the power of a good human connection can go a long way, because in order for us to work with each other, we have to have established that we have common goals, common objectives, that our styles of work are compatible. And nowadays, there's more tools for this than there were when back in the day, when the older generation was doing it, or when or even when I started out doing it. So I believe that is what's going to fill the gap. We should not let bureaucracy get in the way of getting work done. I think most of
Yeah,
us haven't. If not, we would not be here.
definitely. I have another question. Is like, what do you think what do you think it was the influence of your other artistic works in your film work?
It's funny enough that a lot of my creative work is connected, because, for example, when I was a child slash teenager, I thought I was going to be a musical theater performer. My lovely African parents said that's not an option. You have to get a real job. Or real job. So yeah, so like, great, doctor, lawyer, work, something corporate, or medical is fine. Anything that's not that is not going to happen. Obviously, I was very respectful of that. So I ended up not pursuing that, but I continued singing. And funny enough, so my singing career started because of an advertising campaign that I produced, where I was working with a local musician that's quite well known. And when he got the like jingle he had to sing, he was like, this is a really well written song. Like, who wrote this? I'm like, I did. And he's like, oh. He's like, how, like, can you write stuff for me? And I'm like, okay, sure, why not? And that's sort of how I started, and actually was motivated. I was actually motivated by artists that I was working on, that had to do like, that were doing endorsements for my clients, because like, you write really well and you can sing, you should really pursue this. So I was pushed by, again, other creatives and motivated by them to start that. And funny enough, the modeling scouting was the same thing, because I used to do a branding conference in Angola, which was with university students, executives, and we had a lot of speakers, both local and international. One of the speakers actually was one of the investors in Elite Brazil, and he said that his colleagues in Paris actually want to expand their scouting into Africa. And they're like, oh, like, do you know anyone that could help me do that? And I'm like, well, I have to do a lot of castings anyway for a lot of the stuff that I do in advertising and TV. So I could start looking and help you out with that. And that's how that started. So it's interesting that things evolved, and then obviously my career currently in some of the fashion collaborations that I do in terms of design stemmed from my music career, because when I was performing, people saw what I wore and they wanted to get it. So it's interesting that
Yeah,
it's evolved, like they all evolved from each other. A lot of people think that, oh, he just does random things. I'm like, they are all kind of connected because one keeps catalyzing the other one, and maybe there's something else that I may discover
definitely.
that may
Yeah.
develop as well that I don't know yet. So I always like to leave myself open, and when real opportunities, because that's the thing, I like to make sure that whatever I am doing, there are things that are plausible, uh, and um, and there's another thing which is a very difficult exercise for a lot of us creatives is, and I always focus on the most profitable one when I have to prioritize, because a lot, which is why I mentioned the ego, because sometimes you do have to put your ego in the back burner, and remember, you are running a business. Like, we can't always do what we want to do. A lot of the times we have to respect what the market wants us to do. That doesn't mean that it's
Yeah,
taking away
yeah,
free will. That it just means that we are remembering that, you know, our industry does have a corporate side to it, and we need to adhere to it sometimes. Because one thing that I notice sometimes is that people just want to be creative. I'm like, if you just want to be creative, then that's going to be a problem down the line.
We have 4 minutes and
Yes.
two questions, so I'll
Yes.
merge the two of them.
Okay.
One is related to the role of the diaspora in the growing Lusophone community, and the other was the relationship between Brazil and the Lusophone communities.
Ooh.
And maybe you can talk a bit about like our relation to our diasporas and
Okay.
how Brazil is not
It's not. No. So I
one
will.
of our diasporas.
It's not. So I will say this. I know a lot of Brazilians got very upset in the last talk we had together. I'm not sure if you remember the comments. They were very upset when I talked about the fact that, unfortunately, Brazil is a. I'm going to use a word that's problematic, but I think it's the best word. Brazil is kind of an imperial Portuguese-speaking power. Well, it was literally an empire. It was the Empire of Brazil when Dom Pedro was the emperor. But yes, because of their sheer size and their positioning internationally, they are a superpower. And the way that they relate to the rest of the Portuguese-speaking countries is a very one-sided relationship still. It's more of a, they export a lot to us. Like, for example, most Portuguese-speaking countries know Brazilian pop culture. We know who like the biggest directors are. We know their media. We know their TV hosts. We know their celebrities. We know their fashion. We wear their products. We eat Brazilian food, etc. But if you ask any Brazilian anything about any African Portuguese speaking country, not a lot of them are going to know. I'm very happy that now a lot of them know Windeck. But for the most part, they will not have any idea. But it's not really like, it's not I would say a good or a bad thing. It's more of a thing of a historical context. We had no connection to Brazil really, aside from a colonial history, and they really isolated themselves, especially when, I think 200 years ago, the former king of Portugal decided that he also wanted nothing to do, because that's the thing, like the king of Portugal at the time decided he wanted nothing to do with Portugal or the rest of the Portuguese speaking territories and wanted to focus on Brazil. And that's kind of still what Brazil, they're doing their own thing. And then there's us, which brings us to our diaspora. So the Lusophone African diaspora is quite interesting because people often forget, as you mentioned, we are different countries in different parts of Africa. So the way we behave is also very influenced by the parts of where we are. We have the commonality, I think, of language and certain cultural habits that brings us together. So I will say this: one thing that I do appreciate is that wherever there is one Portuguese speaking community, you will find all the other ones because we tend to hang out together. So that is very I think that creates a good sense of community. The main challenge is actually us connecting to the diasporas because they're so diverse and so different. Because, for example, someone from the Lusophone diaspora who is in Japan is not going to want the same thing as someone who is in Holland or in the US. And I think that is the main challenge that I think a lot of us encounter is actually where are we and how do we find each other? Because it's so spread out and so diverse, and the tastes are so differing that that can be a bit of a daunting task. So sometimes I think people overestimate because that's the thing. Because again, going back to, for example, Brazil's connection to its diaspora is very linear because they're only one country, very big country, and they kind of have a network and know how to find each other. I think, for example, each of us have our own network. Like there's a Mozambican network for the Mozambican diaspora. There's like a Cape Verdean one, a Guinean, a São Tomense, an Angolan, etc. How we bring that together, I think maybe that's the challenge. But we should not again only depend on the default. It's like we have to be open and connect to our diasporas, but we have to be open to whoever wants to work with us, consume our work, finance our work, support us as fans. We really have to really be open to that and not only think about our comfort zone. Like we have to respect it, which is what I've always done. It's like I respect and love and reach out to my communities, but at the same time, I have to acknowledge that many times the support may not come from there because sometimes my community does not have the ability or the capacity to do it. Because sometimes it's not people not wanting to, sometimes it's not having the ability to. So we have to also take that into consideration.
Thank you so much, Corinne. I think this was a lovely talk, and I
Thank
think
you.
we touched in so many different things that are our challenges, but our they are all also like where we
And
stand.
just
And
just one thing. Sorry, and I no,
uh,
and I want to remind that all of our friends in Brazil, I still love you.
and we still want to do films with
And
you
we still want to
all.
work with you. What I'm saying is we need to connect more, because that's the thing with Brazil. Because particularly, I would say with Portugal and Brazil, sometimes there's this idea that, oh yeah, they all speak the same language, so they all know each other and they all get along. The big issue is we really don't know each other that well. Like we know them better than they know us, and that applies both to Portugal and to Brazil. Most Palop people, we know Portuguese culture really well. We know Brazilian culture really well. Do they know ours? Not necessarily. They know tidbits that maybe they experience that become trendy or mainstream occasionally, and then they go away. So we like those. We can strengthen and deepen those connections, but unfortunately, as it relates to business, especially creative business, we are in the same foot as we are with any other country that does not speak Portuguese, because that's just where the relationship is, and we have to be aware of that. We love each other as friends, as brothers and sisters who have a common connection, but friendship and business doesn't always mix.
Yeah, but I think I what I hear the most from from this conversation and your talk is like we are asking for a more horizontal relations inside and outside of Africa. We are a minority, but it doesn't mean that we are less talented, less capacitated. We are in this business. We know how to do business. We know how to showcase our countries. We need more space,
Hmm.
and by needing more space, we need more horizontal relations to
Yes.
just showcase our talent. And I
Yes.
think we're here for that. We
Yes,
have
we
a
are.
long
We're
road
open.
ahead, but
We're open to it. We're open for
yeah,
both friendship and business.
exactly. Thank you so much, Corian. And I hope we continue to see each other in these
Yes.
online formats until
It's been a
until we
pleasure.
have the chance. It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the audience have been with us. I hope this talk to all of you a great context of where we are as a Lusophone community is, and what we are open to do and to bring to this cinematic talk. Thank you so much once again. and have a great day.